That's the key to critical thinking, is understanding that you are not your thoughts, that those are separate and that you have control over whether you engage with those or not. You have control over whether you like it, you don't like it, you want to put it to the side, you want to engage with it. You have control, but it's that separation that people have a hard time with.
Matt, what a pleasure. I'm really glad we're here today. And God, I've spent a lot of time listening to your content and your philosophies and just, I mean, Matt, it sounds like you got a lot on your plate. You seem to be doing a lot more than the average guy and or even the exceptional guy. Every time I listen to something or see something about you, you got your hand in a different pie. And I'm just really grateful you took the time out of your busy schedule and life and family life and took the time to share with us some stuff today. Thank you.
Honor's mine, man. Yeah, no, never hurting for something to do, but this is part of but this is part of what I get to do. I get to talk to really cool people about really cool things, and so that's I don't take it for granted, man, at all. So I
Cool, man.
appreciate you.
Epic. Sweet. So I'd love to just do a bit of reflection, looking back over the past 12 months and then maybe looking forward for the coming 12 months for you. If we're looking back over the last 12 months, what's something that you're super proud of and that's gone really well for you in reflection?
That's an easy one, man. It's an easy one. So, in these last 12 months, we started extending what we were doing on the educational side. Everything I do is I consider it to be under the education umbrella. When I was speaking to Fortune 500s all over the world and doing 70, 80 keynotes a year, that was education. Was I was building schools and building out school communities. That's education. As I'm helping other entrepreneurs build out schools, it's education. Um, and something here within the last 12 months is we launched very specifically the education for men that we wanted to see. There's phenomenal men out there. There's phenomenal leaders out there. There are phenomenal guys in this, so-called male education space or men's personal development space, whatever you want to call it. There's some amazing guys, and I'm friends with the majority of them. And we just wanted to do something a little differently and take it from a little bit of a different approach. So we launched that in January, and we have, a few hundred men at this point who are just crushing things. And I hate to say that, and I hate to because it sounds so cliche, but man, when I've got more wives reaching out almost than men who are going, hey, by the way, this is the best thing that's ever happened to our entire family. When I've got young kids reaching out going, thank you for helping my dad. When I like those conversations are happening, then that's a big deal to us, man. So really proud about what's going on the men's side.
Awesome. And if we're looking forward 12 months into the future, what are you really excited about? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, so we talk about our mission here on the Apogee side. We're talking about reseeding the sovereign and free society through education and turning education, completely upside down. So we talk about all these different components of what we do as fingers on the hand, right? That hand is grasping freedom, but there's the fingers on here. So we've got our young men's program that we've had, for now for a couple of years, right? We've got our men's program. That's another finger. What we are launching here in October is our women's program because that's another finger there, right? Within the next 12 months, we'll have our young ladies program dialed and ready to go. And then that fifth finger is the educational component. And so we've got about 250 families right now that we lead through home education. But we're also partnering with, I mean, 100 people. We've got hundreds of applications. We're going to try to whittle it down to 100 to launch K through 12 co-ed boys and girls campuses all across the globe. And all of those things are a part of this. So all of those things in the next 12 months, the programs that haven't launched, the young women's and the schools, that's all coming within the next 12 months.
Wow, you guys are hitting the ground running. That's amazing, dude. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
I feel like we just stay running. Yeah, but it's been amazing, and it continues to be amazing because these people are amazing. So
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, it's actually part of what you guys are doing, and as I've got more into your work, is actually before we started recording, we were talking about where Bianca and I were going to decide to live
yeah,
when we decide to have kids, and what you guys are doing is actually heavily influencing our location determinant because it's stuff like that where I feel like it's so important. And there's things that I've learned how to be a man, quote unquote, but I've got no role model or any idea how to be a father or a
sure.
husband versus a boyfriend versus and it's really understanding that structure and
Yeah.
yeah, it's great that you guys have got this. I love the hand analogy. That's fantastic, man. It's great.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, man.
Sweet. So if you could paint us like a nice broad brushstroke, I'd love to hear kind of like maybe a little bit of a short chronological adventure of how you got here.
Hmm.
And I think that as we dive into the meatier stuff, it helps also the guys to get a bit more context and some credibility about all the amazing work you've done.
Yeah, for sure, man. So, um, big picture, I turned down a job out of college to go work at the White House, and so in turning down that job, I essentially went, "Cool, man. Now what?" Right? Like I have no idea who I am or what I'm doing. I'd always been really, really good at school, but school and life are not the same games. So being good at school does not mean you've got life figured out, nor that doesn't mean you're going to be effective in life at all. So I graduated and really was in kind of like, what the hell am I going to do with my life kind of moment, right? And so a couple of odd jobs, but doing my best to do well at those jobs um, led me down this path where I ended up at Stanford University. And so I ended up working at Stanford for quite a while, and that's really what set the seeds for what we're doing now. So I got to see a couple of things. One, I got to see that as bad as I am at almost everything on this planet, one thing I was decent at is communicating with other humans and doing so from maybe even from a stage, right? And leading other people and bringing people along on a journey. It was something that I had a natural affinity for, partially because I truly love human beings. Um, so I got to see that, but I also got to see the game of school from a very high level. I got to see the game for what it was, and so both of those things pushed me into the next direction. So I became a public school teacher because in my naivete, I was going to go, change the world by changing the system, right? I didn't know what I didn't know, but I had a great experience as a public school teacher. As much as I was in trouble all the time as a public school teacher for not doing what I was told to do. I was what I called creatively insubordinate. I still had a very great experience. So I was that teacher, and then naively, I'm like, well, I'm going to go fix it now by being a school administrator.
And was this
Again,
all in Stockton, or the public school was in Stockton and you
yeah,
moved over
these were in
there?
the Stockton part of California. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
got it.
You are correct, man. Which, if anybody knows anything about Stockton, if you know who the Diaz brothers are, Nate and Nick Diaz, then you have an idea of what Stockton's like, man. But they were rad. They were some amazing human beings. But they were hard kids, hard families. Um, so yeah, became a public school administrator. Uh, Left again naively, thinking, okay, well, this is a game that can't be fixed. Which that part I still know for a fact is true. But naively went to private schools. Private schools often modeled after public schools. So I was a private school teacher and administrator. Went, okay, there's a game being played here too. Ultimately forcing me to leave to start schools that I wanted for my own kids. And as I did that, simultaneously, a speaking career organically took off. Partially, I had to make it work, and then partially, it just sort of took off. And so I began a career speaking to Fortune 500s all over the world while I was building all of these schools. And so those things took off. I started building multiple campuses in California, speaking to every company under the sun. Wildly successful on the schools side. And, a friend of mine, Tim Kennedy, who many of the listeners may know, I heard him on a podcast saying he wanted to open a school. So I reached out. I'm like, hey, man, let me show you how. Like, let's do this. Let's do it the right way. And so I flew out to Texas. We worked out together. He beat me up as he usually does, which no surprise if you understand who he is. And we got the school going off the ground there, but we also realized, man, we've got so many good men in our network. What if we do something to serve not just the kids and build these campuses? Let's keep doing this. But what if we dial in and serve the individual populations too? What if we start with our young men and really pour into them and see where it goes from there? And that set us off on the trajectory that we're on now.
That's incredible. Yeah, and what were you speaking to the Fortune? Because I bet those are quite very different environments. Like, what were you talking to them about?
Yeah, they are, but they aren't. So it's all education, right? It always comes back to education. And again, I say education. Socrates says the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. I say education, people think school. We're not talking about school. We're talking about education, which is personal development, which is continuous growth. So as I'm talking to these Fortune 500s, what they were really wanting to know is, okay, in our organization, we have 5 different generations operating side by side in the workplace. That's never happened before. And so what happens is we say something like leadership. We say something like communication. And everybody goes, "Yeah, we want leadership. Yep, sounds good. We love leadership." But you have 5 very different definitions of what that is because you have 5 very different generations that have grown up and have a very different understanding of what that means, right? And so that causes a lot of issues. There's big bridges of communication gaps within the workplace. And so a lot of times I was helping the organizations work better together to help lead, manage, bring each other along, hire better, maintain that company culture. Sometimes it was selling and marketing to different generations because different generations are going to think about things from a different perspective. So it was all generational based, but it was all education on how do I grow as a human and how do I bring the others around me along with me in some fashion or another. So it was really cool, man, because sometimes I'm sitting there and it's 10 people in a boardroom and it's, the highest levels of Lockheed Martin one week and the highest levels of American Eagle the next week, right? And like in retail. And then I'm going over to Amazon over here. And then the next week I'm speaking at an association and there's 10,000 people in an auditorium. And then sometimes it's so like I got to have all of these different things, but I saw the patterns that were impacting all of them. And it's always people.
Wow. Wow. Would you mind expanding on that and telling me a bit more about the patterns that you saw and like what were the common threads throughout the 10,000 to 5?
Yeah, I mean the common thread is that all education ends up being self-education, all accountability ends up being self-accountability. So people are people, right? So there are different perspectives, obviously based on your age, your the school you went to, the place you grew up, the parents that you had, the culture that you come from. All those things very much impact how you see the world, for sure. And so all those things need to be thought about, need to be considered. Absolutely, the time, where you were born, when you were born, all of those things are wildly important. But there's also those common threads, those meta skills of we all want to feel like we're seen. We all want to feel like we've got a purpose. We all have this innate DNA factory setting where we actually want to grow and get better and go achieve something. Now, there's a lot of cultural things that can pull us away from that. There's a lot of distractions that can pull us away from that. There's a lot of things that can kind of suck us out of that. And I would argue that as we get sucked into the distractions, we start to lose those factory settings, and that's a problem. And I think it's a root cause of a lot of people's issues and anxiety, right? But ultimately, that's what we saw is that we were trying to get people back to these factory settings so that they were comfortable with who they were, so that they wanted to, they reminded themselves they wanted to grow. They reminded themselves that at the end of the day, nobody could force or teach them anything. I can't teach Josh anything, period. It's just like saying, I gave you this pen, Josh. If you refuse at the end of the day to take it, I can't go tell everybody I gave Josh a pen because you didn't take it, right? Education always works that way too. You've got to be able to own that. And so that was always the common thread is how do you inspire people enough to where they remember who they are and then they want to own it to move forward, and then they come together on this group mission, right, where they're all growing, but then they're on these parallel highways of we're all going the same direction too. It's a fascinating topic. So it's there's never hurting for work on that side either because people are people are people.
Yeah, that's an incredible explanation because it totally does come back. Like I think about the times where I've tried to learn things because I think I should learn them, and there is
Right,
like very little desire.
right.
And it's like I just doesn't seem. I'm like beating my head against a brick wall, And it's just like,
Not
and
gonna happen.
then
That's right.
it's just not going to happen. And it's like crazy. It's like almost like no matter how much there's no desire,
That's
and
right.
you like you said that self motivation or accountability around it. It's that you're hopeless. You just and then if you're the teacher and you're just throwing that at somebody and expecting them to just do it, then without the motivation behind it, it's falling on
That's
deaf
right.
ears
Then we're all
practically.
just in this little dance, in this little game, right? And what we're doing is wasting our freaking time. And
Yeah.
I've got no desire for that, man. I've got no desire. I have very limited time on this earth, and in my head, it is always now
Mm.
o'clock, and minutes are either invested or they are wasted. period. There is no
Mm.
net neutral in my mind. So I have no desire to waste my time or anybody else's, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I love you have this beautiful, like, I wouldn't say control, but like use of language. Like, I'm curious, where did that come from? Where you I guess landed on the importance of words. Where you're like, oh, words actually have a lot of weight and meaning and impact. Like, where did that come from? Did you always have an interest in it, or was there a moment where you were like, oh, this is worth investing in, understanding what these mean and what it means to other people?
It's a really good question, man. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the compliment, but I appreciate the question even more because I get to do five or six, or I choose to do, I guess, but I also get the opportunity to do 5 to 6, podcast appearances a week, and I don't think I've ever been asked that question. So I appreciate that greatly. Words matter. They matter a lot. And I wouldn't say it was one thing or one solid decision. I'll say it was a culmination of many things. One, my obsessive nature about everything. So, and then for better or for worse, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to optimize it to the best of my ability, and that is the way I'm wired. The best thing I can, it freaks people out a little bit when I tell them, and some people don't, but it is what it is. The best thing I can tell you is in 1999, I remember sitting in a movie theater, and I watched this movie that everybody knows now, and it's called The Matrix. And sort of watching The Matrix, there's this point at the end of the movie
In
where
the
Neo
theater?
really, in the theater, yeah.
That must have been a
Uh,
trip.
it was a trip. It was absolutely a trip. So watching that there, and I remember at the very end, Neo all of a sudden sees the agents as like the code, right? And he just kind of sees them as this green coded, and everything's just kind of flowing. And he's like, "Oh, okay." I remember seeing that and going, "Oh my gosh, somebody put on a screen kind of how I see things in my head." That sounds a little creepy and it sounds a little weird, but that's always how my mind has worked. I've always and forever looked for patterns, looked for ways to connect things that seemingly shouldn't connect, tried to figure out how to optimize the situations, not just for myself, but for anybody else around me. And we can get, psychologically as deep as we want to get on whatever complex I probably have, and that's fine. But the reality is, I'm always looking for those patterns, and in my head, everything is always just kind of doing that, like kind of down in the screen in my mind. So recognizing patterns has always been a big thing for me, and so inherent in that is I'm always very attentive to the words that I use. I'm very attentive to the words others use, and how much do I believe them? How much do the words they say map out to the actions that I see them exhibit? That's always been something that's been fascinating to me. So I've always studied language from that point, right? Not the phonetics, not the my kids do Mad Libs and they're like, "Dad, I need an adjective." I'm like, "I don't even know what that is." I remind me what that is. I promise you, I don't know. I'm a very good communicator. I'm a very good writer. I don't know the parts of speech. Um, but I'm always just very curious, going, okay, they say this and they do this. What do they mean when they're saying this? Are they saying something they really mean, or are they saying something? I've come to this conclusion that people often will say the things they wish they believed. And then what they do is what they actually believe. And so I'm always curious on how close those are. And right, so I've always done that. And so then it was, as I really started getting into leading other people and being cognizant of, okay, what are my words? What are the words I can use, and how do I use those so that people aren't just inspired, but it actually gets them to take action? I want them to move. So really, as I started stepping on stages more and more and more and started speaking to all these people, I'm going, okay, what are the differences? So I would analyze every talk and go, did I get people to take action? Did I get them to move? What did I change about what I said or how I said it, right? That's when I really started to just pay more attention to the words that I use and be more careful about it, because words do create your reality, not just outwardly, but inwardly. The words that you tell yourself, right? The stories that you tell yourself, the stories that you tell yourself about the stories you tell yourself. That's what critical thinking actually is. Most people don't do that. They don't analyze the stories they're telling themselves. I don't believe most people think, never mind critically think, because they're not thinking about their thinking. So it's been this continuous journey for me. It's still something I'm fascinated with.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So I'd love to know, like, for those of us that aren't gifted with the perspective of the Matrix like you, how would you suggest someone?
With obsession, maybe. That's all it is. I don't want to make it sound like I've got anything special going on because I don't think that's what it is. It's an obsession. It's an optimization of everything obsession. Right? I'm obsessed about my wife. I'm obsessed about my children. I'm obsessed about them in terms of how can I serve them best? How can I watch them so closely that I know what they're thinking before they think it? How can I and it's a little bit frightening when nothing is happening at all and my wife's like, oh, you know what, but I know because of where we are, because of a song that's playing, because of a conversation we had earlier, because of what she just ate, because of what I know what she's thinking and I know what's about to
The
come out of her
dots
mouth and
connected.
I say it first, right? And that's creepy, but I only do it because I want to optimize my relationship with her. I want to serve her to the best of my ability, right?
Hmm.
So it's not I don't look at it as any kind of special gift. It may be more of a curse than anything else, but it's not special. It's just that's my thing as I can obsess around things like that.
Yeah, I love it. And where do you like think that someone? I'd love to dive a bit deeper into that critical thinking piece because I think it's really
Wow.
fascinating. Is you know, as I started meditating, and that was the first experience where I was like, oh, there's like I can actually see my thoughts. You know, it wasn't like I was just in the plow of just like
Yeah.
the day. I don't know. You like Sam Harris talks about it as waking up, and that's what it literally
Yeah.
feels like. You're like actually
Yeah.
waking up to what's going on in your head and the world
Yeah.
around you. Like, do you have any suggestions for people to start to, you know, more make that, I guess, practice of critical thinking doable? You know, rather than just being a big concept.
Sure. I love that question, man. And um, good on you as far as the meditation. I don't ever, the only reason I don't ever personally, uh, I guess, recommend it is because I know I've not had success with it. I also know a lot of people have had a lot of success with it. And I think that's fantastic. So there's a level, again, all education is self-education, right? And so there's a level of self-awareness to understand that. I did my best to go try to sit in one of those, and I won't say try. Try is a soft word that I don't even want to use. I did what I believe my best was at laying in one of those. Uh, what do they call it? The float
The
tanks.
float tank? Oh my god, I
Yeah,
hate those things, dude. I
the
hate them so
sensory
much.
deprivation, right? Man,
Not for me. Not for
no,
me.
just not my not wired for it. That's not where I'm going to get my thinking done. I get most of my thinking done through action, right? That's where my brain is working the best is when I'm actually doing something I'm creating. I start to see those patterns and I start to, put things together. But what you're saying is something different. It's that critical thinking. One of the things that, yes, some people can get into it in a meditation and see their thoughts separate. That's the key to critical thinking is understanding that you are not your thoughts, that those are separate and that you have control over whether you engage with those or not. You have control over whether you like it, you don't like it, you want to put it to the side, you want to engage with it. You have control, but it's that separation that people have a hard time with. Now, I understand some people can separate in meditation, and I think that's awesome. Great, do it, dive in. I'm not the guy to tell you how to do that. Here's what I do that has been effective for me, and then I know it's been effective for a number of guys. Write it down. So, what I mean by that is, what is something that is ailing you? It's something that is worrying you. It is something that, hurts you. It's something that annoys you. It's something that really just kind of mentally destroyed you. It's something that you're really excited about. It's something that you're super, like, I'm really thinking into the future that this could be amazing. What doesn't matter, whatever that is, write out every single bit of what you think that thought is right now. This is what happened to me. Great. This is what hurt me. Okay, great. Write it out. And I'm talking write out the details. The devil is in the details. Then he said this, and I remember when my dad said this, I remember feeling like this, that you need to write out every single detail. You get it on paper because what it does, what did you say when you meditate? You separate the thoughts, right? So when you're writing these things out, you are now literally objectively separating What was in here, you're separating it now and you're giving it a physical body that is now away from you that you can literally take a look at and go, okay, now I'm looking at this. Now it's not the chaos in my head anymore. It's physically out on paper. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that now. And now I'm going to analyze it and I'm going to walk through step by step. And I'm not going to go just read through it really fast. I'm going to read through it line by line, slowly. And I'm going to take a deep breath. And through each line, I'm going to pay attention to my physiological response. Because when I have a physiological response, that lets me know that that's a piece that I need to sit and think about and go, okay, am I putting the right emphasis on this? Is there anything I can do to change this? What do I have to do to accept this? How do I move past this? How do I stop coming back to this? If there's a physiological response, that's usually a good indicator that there's something to sit with for a second and to force yourself to continue to revisit it and to breathe through it so that ultimately you can get past it or transform it to use it in another way. But you've got to get it out on paper first. That's what writing is for.
Yeah, I love that. I really like that we went, we both had two different examples of how we go about that.
Yeah,
And,
totally.
I think it's fantastic. And really
I
to
do
your
too.
point of self-education
Yeah,
and learning styles. So
yeah,
I'd love to, I think that I really want to move, with this vein of action, talk a little bit about Apogee Strong and I'd love to, if you can share that story about going from a paperclip to a truck and that kid that did that, and just share these methods of teaching that you guys are doing that are quite different. And then because I
yeah.
think for a lot of us, myself and entrepreneurs and small business owners and stuff and entrepreneurs, you're kind of like, wow, imagine if I'd done that at 14, where would
Right.
I be now, is quite
That's right.
insane to think of. So yeah, I'd love to,
It
if you
is
can share
insane
that
to think
story.
of.
And
It is insane to think of, but what I want people to remember too is, yeah, if you had done that, where could you be now? That's very possible, but also you would still have a lot of other problems too, right?
definitely.
You would still have to be working through those too. You'd
Yeah.
still have to, right? The thing is, you would just have more of a mentality of being okay with unsure freedom versus fully laid out slavery, right? More people are usually more comfortable with a very detailed, laid out, fully planned out slavery than they are the unsure freedom, which is why most people will never be free. So you'll still be there. I want to make sure that that's out there. But yeah, so what we do with our young people is we actually have them do things. And I know that's a crazy concept to most people because they're like, no, what do you do to the kids? No, no, no. We have them do something, right? And it's schooling has taught us that we need to do something to young people in order for them to learn. And the reality is we need to inspire them to go do something on their own, just like we do with adults. They're not practicing to be people, they're people with less practice, right? So they just need to practice. So give them something to practice. Give them a goal to go after, inspire them to go do it. That's what these projects and challenges are in Apogee Strong. Every month they have readings that we talk about. Yeah, there's workouts that we can recommend. Yeah, they're going to meet with the best men on the planet and have great conversations. You bet, all of those. But it's the work that they're going to do around those projects and challenges that really move the needle. So they've got something to do every month that forces them to get outside their comfort zone and to go do something and reflect on what's happening while they're doing, what kind of things are changing internally and externally, and what's the good, the bad, the ugly with that. Because then they can reflect and go, okay, how would I change it for next time? And well, now it's next time. Let's go do it again. That's what growth looks like, right? That's what education looks like. So yeah, one of our challenges is that paperclip challenge, and it is quite literally starting with a paperclip, and you've got 30 days to see what you can trade up to. And you can't call grandma and be like, Grandma, I got this challenge, so can I give you a paper clip, right? And then you
You can
can
give me
give me,
$1,000.
yeah, right? Like, I'll give you this paper clip, Grandma, if you can give me a stove. Like, no, it's like, no, man, you're gonna go talk to people you don't know. You're gonna put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. You're gonna go door to door, and you're gonna start to be really intentional on how do you just continue to trade and move this forward. So yeah, we did have one young man who got his first ever truck
That's so insane, dude.
trading
That's so
up from a
crazy.
freaking paperclip. Isn't that rad? Right? So not a bad deal, man. But I mean, I've done this. I've done this with so many young men now, and you see they're coming back with all kinds of stuff. And I've done this in a shorter term than 30 days. I took a group of students to a mall in the Sacramento area in California, and they had no idea what they were going for. I said, all
So
right, we're
you
going to
did.
the
They
mall.
didn't know they were doing the paperclip challenge. You just took them
They
to
had
the
no
mall.
idea
That's
what we were doing.
legendary. That's so
Yep,
good.
I had no idea. I'm like, we're going to the mall. They're like, this is sweet. I'm like, yeah, just wait till we get there. So then we get there, and I'm like, all right, man, here's your task. You have 3 hours. You cannot leave. It's a giant mall, but you can't leave the mall. You can go outside and walk around the peripheral part of the mall, or you can stay inside. You can talk to strangers. You can talk to the people working in the stores. You can talk whatever. Here's your paperclip. What can you come back with in 3 hours? Here's the rules. Here's what you gotta, it's gotta be a trade. It's gotta be this. You gotta negotiate this. Like, gave them the rules. In 3 hours, man, they came back with, I had students that came back with all kinds of clothing. I had one student that came back with a giant neon sign. I had a student that came back, I had a student that came back with a functioning cell phone in three
That's
hours.
so legendary.
Yeah, man. So think about that experience as a young person, because in your mind, you just go, that was kind of crazy. Oh, and then I did it, and look what happened. I can do anything. That's the whole point, is getting people to realize that they've got so much more than they thought they did. So, yeah, it's been pretty rad, man.
It's amazing, man. Yeah, I used to like my first career in sales was door to door. I was selling like telecom, and so I was
Yeah.
like selling cell phones, TV, internet, and all that stuff. And then I did all the onboarding and training and stuff like that. And so I was like leading teams and stuff like that, but it was just like crazy. I'd sometimes get, and I was like 23, 24, and some you get kids that are like 17, 18, and it was so wild to like watch their mentality, and like you just see something change in their eyes when they're like, oh, I can actually just go up to strangers and like convince them to give me money in exchange for something. And it's just like you're like you literally change, like what you said. You're like, I can do anything. Like, it's just it's this wild experience. And I think that something that I've done with some friends who are a little bit more obsessed with this sort of stuff, like me, is like actually going and doing these challenges as an adult, and
Yep.
like hearing something like this, what Matt's talking about, and being like,
Yep.
when you actually do these things as an adult, like Tim Ferriss talked about this one where it's like you ask for 10% off at a coffee
Yep.
shop for just no reason,
Yep.
and you're
Right.
like talking to and they, can I have 10% off? And the cash register's like, what? And you're like,
And don't
yeah.
say anything.
Yeah, you just don't say anything.
And wait.
Exactly, man. And it's just like, it's so great to, I think, and it's really important to see these things. And, like even my first response is like, oh, imagine where I could have been
Yeah.
if I had this. But it's like, you can just do it now and go even further, you know?
That's the thing that people don't want us, right? So everything we're doing, because what you're talking about is a factory setting. Do kids, do toddlers have a hard time coming up and telling you what they want and asking for what they want? They don't, until it gets trained out of them, right? And it gets trained out in any number of ways. It might get trained out by the parents. It definitely gets trained out by school, but it can be trained out in any number of ways. And it's simply a choice to move back to those factory settings. You are under no obligation to be the same person that you were last year. In fact, I would say it's your moral obligation not to be the same person. And hey, by the way, you're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Decide.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. It's wild how I think the environment is also huge, that the importance of like doing it with friends. Cause I've done, when I first started doing, I got into like talking to girls in the street, and I was like, oh my God, that's the thing. I was like, you can just go out and talk to girls. I was like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I was like 18, and I remember like I drove in Sydney. There's like kind of Sydney, you might have heard of Bondi Beach, and I used to live like north on the other side of the river. So I'd ride my motorbike like an hour, like all the way across the Sydney Harbour Bridge over to Bondi, where I was having men's group, and I went like an hour early, and I went by myself because I was like, cool, I'm just going to go talk to some chicks, grab some numbers, see what happens. And I
Yeah.
just walked around for an hour and a half. I set aside an hour and a half. Thankfully, I bumped into a friend at the hour mark, and I didn't talk to a single person. And I
Yeah.
was just like shitting myself for 60
Yeah.
minutes. And then my buddy was like, we bumped into each other. He's like, oh, you want to go for a swim? I was like, oh, thank God. I was like, let's go for a swim. I was
Yeah,
like, get me
let's
the
go.
fuck out of
Yeah.
here. But it's like, and then when you go with a group of buddies, it's just
Yeah.
like you've got someone in your ear that's like, we made a 1, 2, 3 rule, where it's like, if they caught you looking at somebody, they'd say one, two, three, and you had to be walking by the time they said three. And it was like, and then you're just moving. And it's like the difference of doing it with friends or in an environment of people that are supporting you versus trying to talk against that voice in your head can sometimes be, I think, the difference between success and failure.
So then if you are an educated person or working towards being an educated person, what you're going to do is you're going to analyze yourself continuously, and you're going to look for those patterns that cause you to take action as well. Right? What are the patterns? Is it the pattern I need this specific guy around me? I need these guys around me. I need this to be my environment. I need this to be the target. If the target is this, that's when I start to balk. Okay, how do I, right? And you're continuously looking for those patterns to eventually collapse time for you to take action quicker and more efficiently with anything that you want to do. That's what an educated person does.
Yeah, totally, man. Yeah, I think, and the place that I ended up actually was the one, two, three rule. And so
Yeah.
I took that thing so
Yeah.
that when I was by myself, and I still do it if I don't want to
Yeah.
do something. Like I had a plunge
Yeah.
this morning, and our plunge
Yeah.
has been like freezing for the
Yeah.
last 3 days, really slowly because we're in a hot climate. And so I haven't plunged for like 3 days. And so coming back to it after doing it daily, you're like, oh my God, it's really cold. And I was
Yeah.
like, one, two, three, go. And I just like threw myself in, like
Yeah.
basically threw myself into the freezer. And it's like, that was the thing. Like, I'm really glad you brought that up. Is like, yeah, analyzing it and then taking the piece that's actually the motivator and being able to
That's right.
take that through the rest of your life. That's such a good
That's
insight.
right. How do you apply that to other circumstances and other situations, right? So I'm always
Mm.
like I am in my again, I'm in my head all day, every day. And it's a horrifying place, I think, for most people.
Yeah.
I really do. But yeah, that's why.
Totally, man. Thanks so much for sharing. That was really cool. So I'd love to, you touched on something earlier in our conversation that I'd love to come back to, which is the game of schooling. And, we're still on the same vein of education, but I'd love, what was, when you were looking at it and when you were in it versus in it and out of it as you transitioned, and then now you were looking out and now you're back in it. Like, what was this game that you saw? And then how have maybe changed the rules in the new schooling environment that you're building?
Yeah. So the game, I love that. The game, it's really a religious belief that has been thrust upon us. And so there is this cultural religious adherence to keeping school looking like the way it looks. Academia is king. You have to do certain things at certain times. Everybody grouped together with as many other kids your age as possible. You got to go to college because that's what's going to set you up for success. There's so many of these things that are actually the antithesis of human development, the antithesis of real education that's experiential versus having somebody, who's the sage on the stage. There are so many things that are completely outside of how humans have always, whether you think you evolved this way or whether you think you've been designed this way, how humans have always operated. We've gone a complete 180, but we've done it for long enough where now what is familiar is confused with what is true, right? People are familiar with that, so they believe it's true. And so what I saw was the very clear separation between familiarity and truth. I saw a lot of young people that I got to work with at Stanford who were extraordinarily academically talented. And then organizations were like, this guy sucked, though, when he came to work, like he sucked. And then I saw it when I was working with him. I'm like, okay, that's great. He's got his OChem book and he can tell me, like, man, he'll pass that test. I don't even know what he's talking about. Like, dude, like, that's fantastic. But he's miserable. I'm really happy. And he can't talk to other human beings. I'll talk to anybody. He hates his life. I really like mine. He just asked me how to write a check. And hey, what? Like, that's not hard. So I started to see some of those, again, those patterns of separation. And then I started seeing the game itself at the university. I grew up thinking you want to go to a quote unquote, first I grew up thinking there were quote unquote elite schools, right? That's not true. So like they're not that's a whole nother conversation. Um, But the application process, well, of course, it's a meritocracy. You get your good grades, you get your high SAT scores, and that's what, and you do your extracurriculars, and that's what can get you into college. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's a whole lot of other layers and levels to that whole thing. So, seeing the game there, going into public school, seeing like, hey, I see what this young man needs. He needs some mentorship. He needs some guidance. He needs to not be selling drugs after school. He needs to not be tempted to join this gang. He needs to, and it's like, no, no, no. He needs algebra. What? That's not what he needs. That's not what he needs. School says he needs that. Education says this is how he's going to grow, right? And then you go into the public administration, and it's like, okay, this is what this community needs, and this is how we bring everybody together. And it's like, no, 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 we need funding, and you need funding by passing these tests, and you need. So there is just an overwhelming disconnect between what people need to grow and what school sets them up to do. They're two different games. It would be like me telling you to play soccer for 18, 20 years of your life and then getting done. I'm like, sweet, man, you ready for your soccer test? And you're like, yes. And I'm like, cool, here's a chessboard. You're like, what? I'm like, yeah, it's a game. It's a game, right? That was a game. This is a game. Same thing, right? No, it's not the freaking same thing. It's not the same thing. School is not the same thing as life either. And it's pretty obvious, but it doesn't matter that it's obvious because it's so ingrained in us as a religion of what everybody needs to do. That's what we're battling against.
Really. Yeah, man. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like it's obvious, but it's so ingrained. You know what I mean?
It's
It's like when
obvious,
you
but
when
we
you
don't
look at it and
care.
you have a conversation, and then we go back to our life. Like you could have, I can imagine two people having this conversation, like
Uh-huh.
agree, 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 and then they just go back and
Uh-huh.
do the same thing. They go back and play soccer again, and it's like,
Bingo. Words are what
yeah,
they wish they believe.
mm,
Actions are what they actually believe.
yeah, man.
Or are too afraid, so they just live in the lie. Right? So maybe that I'll have conversations with people who will logically go, "Oh my God, yeah, you're right. Okay, yep, you're right." But it's more comfortable to live the lie than it is to ask more questions and to dive into the truth. Because what happens is if I start to actually dive into the truth and want to live according to the truth, well, it's not familiar to other people and it's very uncomfortable for them. So it's like, wait, what if I decided to homeschool my kid? What if I decided to home educate my kids? Ooh, my mom is really going to give me some grief because she's going to think that like I'm not doing things right. She's really going to the people next door are going to think I'm a really bad parent. I remember growing up thinking homeschool kids are all weird, so I'm going to be what if my oh man, my kids are going to be are they going to be weird? Oh, that's going to really piss off my wife. Oh God, that's really going to and because all of those strings are too, like, they don't want those to unravel, it's like, oh, I'll just live in the lie. I'll live in the lie. Forget I ever even thought it. I'm going to live in the lie. I'm sure they'll turn out fine. Well,
Yeah.
and that's the majority of people would rather live in those uncomfortable lies, even if
That's
they've
so
seen the
funny.
truth.
I'm sure it'll be fun. That'll be
I'm
fun.
sure. I'm sure it'll be good. It'll be good because otherwise, I can't think otherwise. Otherwise, I'm gonna be forced to actually have to take some action, and shit can go sideways.
Oh my goodness. So I'd love to, if you can just maybe do a one, two, three of the game, that you saw in school versus the things that you've changed. So someone who doesn't understand, your world and these are types of education, so they can get a picture of a quick comparison, and then they can maybe see some really quick differences there. Is that question
Yeah,
cool?
yeah, that makes sense. So there's a number of things that we do differently. One, school says academia is the thing to put you on a pedestal to get you ready for an eventual experience. We look and go, no, no, no. Let's give you the actual experience, and then eventually, if you decide to attach academia to that, you can. Right? So school says, hey, we're going to teach you all about socket wrenches. Do you care about socket wrenches? No. All right, well, shit, we're going to do it anyways. So here's a socket wrench. Here's a freaking spark plug. Here's a freaking belt. You can tell I know nothing about cars and engines because I don't care. But school's like, doesn't matter. We're going to teach you all about those parts anyways, so that someday you can tell everybody you fixed an engine. And everybody's like, all I did was make a trifold board about a fucking socket wrench, and now I'm educated? Like, what? What are you talking about, right? So we go, hey, here's an engine to be fixed. If you're excited about that, cool. Let's go fix it. And in the context of that, you have to be like, I need something to turn this. And you're like, oh, okay, well, here's this thing. It's called a socket wrench, but go ahead and put it and now you have an idea, right? So we go experience first based on interest. And then the academia part will get tied to that because now it has something to be rooted to and it matters and they care. That's a different, so it's a completely opposite approach to that. Whereas school's like, no, just the academia, and you probably actually won't even really have the experience. Another big difference is school is, hey, we're going to assume you suck, you know nothing, and you can control nothing. So we're going to control you and tell you what to do, when to do it. Blind obedience is what you need. As long as you can blindly obey for a long time and you play our game and we're going to dangle your carrots, we'll give you this little mark on a piece of paper that says you did a good job and you'll make a great employee someday, son. Right? So school does that. We take the opposite approach and go, you've got massive amounts of responsibility right now. You are going to be responsible for taking this on. We're going to lay out these cool challenges and opportunities. We're not going to force you to do any of them. Not going to get to move on anything, but it's going to be you. If you want to get better, how can we help you get better? How can we come alongside you as a coach rather than being the person doing something to you? How can I be like, man, Josh, dude, let's start. You want to start a podcast? Let's start a podcast. I've started a podcast. Like, let's start a podcast. Let's dive in. What do you think, man? Who do you want to get on? What do you want to do? Cool, man. Like, let's build out the equipment. What's next? Well, I want to get guests. How do we do that, man? Let's do this together. Like, let's figure this out, right? We just take a very different approach in terms of that. So it's an opposite approach. It's not about obedience. It's about collaboration. That's a huge difference. Another huge difference. School says, I mean, I can give you so freaking many. School says,
We'll cap it at 3.
yeah, I know. And so I'm going to the third one right here. School says, hey, students, you guys come here. We're going to do things to you, right? Parents, trust us. Stay out. You can be on the PTA if you want. You can drive some kids to a field trip if you want. You want to be a chaperone, you can be a chaperone. But this is what we're going to do. Don't question what we're doing here. Education says, hey, parents, here's exactly what they're doing. We'd love for your insight. We'd love for you to help on this. But also, we want to take you on a journey of growth yourself, because if we're talking about growth mindset for these kids all day and they go home and you're not on a journey, well, that actually is counterproductive to what we're trying to do. So at our campuses, I'll remember all those fingers, right? Well, our young students are going through all their projects and their challenges and they're doing and hey, so are their parents.
Yeah.
It's everybody, the whole family is going to grow together at the same time.
So
So we care
important.
about the entire family. We don't, schools like to say, well, we want to educate the whole child, in the holistic experience, the whole child. Okay, cool. Well, then you better make sure their parents are on a journey too, because that's part of that whole child developing is their relationship with the family. So let's make sure the family is as strong as it can be. All right. Let's make sure if you want to educate the whole child, physical education matters. Actually being in shape and understanding what it means to be healthy matters. Being sick and anxious is not the factory setting of a human. I haven't even had a freaking cold in a decade. Like, it's possible to be really, really healthy. That's actually the factory setting. It's actually the default. It's not what we're not supposed to be sick. So let's talk to our kids about that and let's make sure they're physically capable. Like, so think about what school does. You can pretty much guarantee we're doing the opposite.
It's a great bow to put in it for sure. Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember thinking about my school experience, and I hated school. Like,
Yeah.
hated it. I was always in trouble. My brother got
Yeah.
expelled from our school. I nearly got expelled from our school. We were both like, yeah. I moved out of home when I was 16, because I was being too naughty, trying to escape my mum. And like,
Yep.
I had this teacher, an aviation. I was randomly, like, not a very big school, had a teacher who was able to teach aviation. And so we learned how to like fly planes and stuff, which is wild considering like I was in random middle of
Yeah.
nowhere in Western Australia. And Mr. Murray, he was this giant, like jacked Scottish dude, and he would drive us like to like a town, like a kind of city that was like 30 plus minutes away, and we lived like 30 minutes south of the school, so he'd drive us 30 minutes north, and I'd stay at his place, and like he would take us flying, and just like I learnt so much from this guy. I learnt more life lessons that I've taken and improved my life, and I've gotten so much from my life because of this one teacher who sounds quite similar to you when you're in Stockton. It was just like he got in trouble from all the other teachers and the school board and all this other stuff, and he would like ride a motorbike to school, and then he was I mean, shout out to Mr. Murray. Hopefully this doesn't get even a really funny story. He was like, oh, the way to escape the cops is like they can't see your license plate if you're going super fast on a motorbike, so you have a second helmet. And he's like, so if the cops start chasing you, you just go down a back street and then switch helmets and drive straight past them. And I was like, I didn't learn the lesson to speed, but I was like, oh, this is a guy that like is just like dynamic and like knows how to do things on the fly. And like, even though it wasn't a good behavior, I
Yeah.
actually respected him because he was being honest with me rather than him being
Yes.
like this perfect prismed
That's
person,
right.
you know?
That's
And
right.
like, he had this discipline of, he would like, before dinner, and I was like raised going to church and that sort of stuff, but definitely like I threw that away in my adolescence. But before dinner, he would take out the Bible and he would read a passage. And I was like, I just remember like watching him at his dinner table and just being like, oh wow, this guy has discipline. And it was just like a moment that like it that moment taught me so much about discipline rather than people telling me what discipline is. And it was like such a random, I'm like in the bush, like, you know, if you think of Australia, it's like pretty remote where I grew up. And like, you know, this guy just like gave me time, he gave me focus, he gave me attention. He didn't take my bullshit. And he
Yeah.
just like, I learnt those lessons have stuck with me for my entire adulthood, you know? And it's
So right.
like the
That's
time,
it.
amount of time that he actually spent with me
That's right.
outside of school compared to like my parents was
Yeah.
pretty small, you know?
Yeah.
But it was like
Yeah.
pretty wild.
Impactful. That's rad, man. I love that. So he was an example first for, and that's any educator has to be that. They've got to be the example of what they're expecting, right? And so that's from a parental standpoint because you're the primary educator for your young kids, and that's from a, you know, if you want to work as a functional educator in some sort of professional environment, you being that example matters all the time. You need to be the person you want them to be. Period. End of story. Right? That's the biggest thing. But then you can pull so many life lessons when we're talking about education and what it means to be educated. Everybody's going to have different interests, and so people say, well, gosh, how can you really, get down to the individualization for each person? Well, there are those meta things, those meta skills that everybody needs the ability to communicate. Everybody needs the ability to think through patterns. So let's define what those meta skills are for you, and then we use our interests to still teach those meta skills over everything else, right? The life lessons that you learn flying planes. I've never flown a plane. I don't know anything about flying a plane, but I can get the same life lesson through something else. I've stepped, I got to fight in the cage 9 times. Cool. I can pull a lot of life lessons out
Really?
of that. Yeah, that
Crazy.
I can take those lessons and I can apply when my daughter, I've never ridden horses like her, but she's 12 and she's got 2 jobs teaching people to ride horses, and she rides horses every single week. Cool. There are lessons that she learns riding horses that I learned by getting beat up that I can, like, we can all, right? Same lesson, just a different medium to impart it. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's crazy how much like I think attention as a young kid and even as an adult, like I work with this guy who's just incredible, Tristan, and we talk every single day. Like I'm his head guy for sales, and we talk every single day. So weekend, he's like, "Hey man, 15-minute check in," and he's just like, it's one of those things where I feel like sometimes myself, like sometimes I've looked back in periods of my life at my development, and like what we were talking about, how early you can go and do these paperclip challenges now as an adult. Like it's not over, It's just because you're an adult, it doesn't mean you can't stop learning and growing, and like you said, make that decision to change. And Tristan was like making an example of, he's like, dude, he's got friends in the space, that are similar sized company to him, and he's like, yeah, they talk 3 times a week. He's like, you and I talk every single day. And he's like, think about the difference that makes over a year versus the guys who talk 3 times a week with their boss. And I was just like, and it just made me, I was like, wow, I just doubled down on like, I do objection handling with a friend of mine who's doing something else. And I was like, okay, man, we're chatting every single day. And it just like, it was a moment where I learned something and I implemented it, and that's going to stick with me for the rest of my life at 30, instead of it being like looking back and being like, oh, yeah, I wish I'd learned X, Y, Z when I was younger. It's like you can still learn and change and grow,
It's exactly it, man. Most
Yeah,
people think there's a time limit, there's specific boxes, like
totally.
boxes to be checked in a certain order at a certain time. And once I get past that, well, I'm all done. And that's as educated as I'm going to get. No, dude,
Mm.
you're not talking about going back to school. It is a nonstop thing. You're growing or you're dying. It's one of those. Pick.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's better to be, what is it, green and growing than to be ripe and rotten.
That's
That's
right,
a saying
man.
friend of mine's got. It's
Exactly
great.
right. I
Yeah.
like that.
I'd like to, I think the role models that I've talked about are often, men, and it's like as an adolescent and even as a man growing up, I was explaining, I spent a lot of time in men's groups. It's like it's been a pivotal thing for me to change, some bad behaviors that I had, but also like to elevate me to a new level. I'd love to just start this next part of our conversation with a broad brushstroke of, the importance of having men in one's life, because that wasn't a thing for me until I was like 21, and then now it's become like a necessity. And I think that a lot of guys, like some friends that I've made, they're like, and then I've introduced to men's group and stuff like that, which I try and do with as many guys as possible. Is like they're like, whoa, dude, I didn't even know I was missing this. And like I'd love you to just, if you can just share like, the importance that you see in it, and then we can dive down into some nuances.
Yeah, I mean, again, from a logical standpoint, right? If you've got, a bunch of people that are gathering together, a bunch of kids that are gathering together, and they're all playing games, like that's great, and we can all play various games at different times, all around each other, and that's cool. And there's an element of socialization. I'm over here playing soccer, you're over here hitting a baseball, you're over, like you guys are over here shooting hoops, and like that's cool, man. That's awesome. At some point, it's really fun if everybody's playing the same game because you can all work on getting better together, right? You can all come together as a team and actually get really, really good at that game. And one of the things that I think culturally we have a hard time acknowledging is that, look, yeah, everybody's in this life, everybody's moving things forward, everything, but there's there are different games played within the bigger game of life. Life is different for men than it is for women. Life is different for young men than it is for like those things are okay to acknowledge. So one of the best things we can do is to get with other people who are in roughly that same time of life and go, okay, man, let's play this together. How do we think we can play this really, really well? And then let's hold each other accountable. It's that 1, 2, 3 principle, right? It's a little easier to hold that 1, 2, 3 when you got another guy next to you because you don't want to let him down. And you've decided. So sometimes our propensity to want to make sure I don't let somebody else down, like we'll talk ourselves out of doing anything for ourselves, but we won't want to let our buddy down, right? And so like there's value in that. And so we're putting these men together so that they're all playing the same game at the same time in their own arena, and then they're coming back together and they're going, okay, this is what I did. This is how it worked. This did not work. What did you guys do? Somebody's like, well, this was my experience. This is how I did it. It's like, oh, okay, let me try that, right? And so it just creates this environment of support. You realize you're not alone. You're not a weirdo. You're not thinking about things crazy because shit, there's 20 other guys, 50 other guys, 100 other guys that are thinking the same kind of stuff. They're dealing with the same issues. They're dealing with the same problems. Some of them have tried some things that have actually worked that I never would have thought of. Cool, man. Now I'm going to go think of that, right? So you're all in that game together, man, and it just makes you a more effective human.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things, I had a friend of mine, Jake, back in Australia, and he was like, he's like, I walk around with this level of confidence that I have because I have the support of the men around me. And I
Hmm.
look at other men in the street and I'm like, wow, how did I ever live like that? Like,
Hmm.
how did I even have confidence? Because I
Hmm.
didn't realize how alone I was, and it's
Hmm.
like, it's the, the friendships that I've gotten from group that are now, even guys that I'm not in group anymore because I've moved from
Hmm.
Australia to Canada to here or whatever. It's like, there's a rich friendships that I'm going to keep for life because I think there's a level of commitment that we often don't see, and it's so easy to disengage
Yeah.
nowadays and just kind of drift off without even saying I'm disengaging and leaving. Whereas like when you're, you can just stop replying and fade off into the ether, and no one ever hears you again, hears of you again, and it's like there's something about showing up every week or whatever time frame you've committed to, and then the fact that you can't leave without a challenge, I think is like pretty wildly impactful because I've had period of times where I'm like, fuck this, group stupid. I fucking hate these people. You know what I mean? It's just like, but the fact that we've all, like you said, we've all gone through it. Everybody goes through it, and the fact that everyone sticks through it through time, I think, builds a level of trust that was just, it's next to impossible to replicate these days.
Yeah.
Unless you're in like fighting together, you're in the
Right.
army, you're in the police force,
Right.
like those, that's,
Right.
you have to
Well,
go and
that's
hand in a resignation. Whereas with friendships nowadays, you don't have to say, hey guys, here's why I'm leaving.
that's
You can
right.
just peace
Back
disappear.
off and disappear. Yep,
Yeah.
totally, man. And look, guys can potentially do that too, but you alluded to something that, it's in our design. Again, men and women are different, and there's, I'll talk about the fact that women um, are able to think their way sometimes better than we are into new ways of acting, whereas men have to act their ways into new ways of thinking. And it's a pretty cool design in that way. We need to be able to take action, but in that process, women again have a very have an easier time traditionally. Again, there's some things that men, some men do better than others, and that are more on the quote unquote feminine trait, and vice versa. But the reality is, women usually do a better job of that face to face conversation. Let's talk. Let's talk through our issues. Let's get all these things out. Let's do this. Whereas guys, can we do that? Of course we can do that. But we tend to want to go, okay, let's not do this face to face. Let's go side by side, and let's go do something together. Let's go tackle something together. Let's go create something together. Let's go beat something together. Let's go, kill something together. Let's go, like, we want to go do something together, right? It's how we're designed. And so when you have just a group of guys that are on a joint mission like that, it can be a really, really powerful thing. And it does become a hard thing to walk away from too, because you're also walking away from whatever this joint mission is, right? And that goes against our DNA too.
Totally. Would you mind like sharing a little bit about maybe? I think what we've talked about are all parts of what you and I think are a good life. Is like good education, good friends, good family, that sort of stuff. Has that changed since when you were 20 versus now? Like what you are looking, what you see as a good life, and could you share that?
Oh,
Could you share some of
goodness gracious. Yeah, it's changed drastically. It's really funny, man. Um, I found these journals yesterday.
that?
And
Crazy.
they're journals that my wife and I, when we started dating, like 18 years ago, started
How old were
writing
you
back.
guys when you?
So 18 years ago, 25 and 21.
Crazy.
Right? So we were 25 and 21, and we started dating and getting to know each other, and so we started asking each other in these journals all these questions about, the ideal life, and all of our hopes and dreams and all the things we wanted to do, right? And so we're kind of laying all this stuff out, and it was really cool, man, to go back and take a look and go, oh, okay, well, that idealistic version sort of stayed true. Like, we still are kind of on that page in terms of, there was both of us kind of were like, oh, we'd love to live in like a mountainous region with a lot of trees, and like and we were, Bay Area city kids, right? But both of us were like, ooh, that's really cool. We live on a freaking farm in the mountains now. I'm surrounded by thousands of trees, right? And so, like, it was cool to see all that kind of stuff. So see those similarities, but there were so many things that were also just a product of not knowing we didn't know, right? We had the specific jobs that we thought we wanted to have, and we had the specific neighborhoods and the specific houses and the specific, right? We're dreaming about all these things as these two city kids that have always lived in the city, that live in the suburbs, and um, now a good life for us has everything to do with sovereignty and freedom. And I mean that in every fashion. I want to be able to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whoever I want to do it with. And so does she. And what that means is, how can we not need to be tied to anything? Part of the reason we moved to this farm is because we want to be able to be self-sufficient. That's great. There's grocery stores down the road. Cool, man. Awesome. I think that's a fantastic thing. What happens if those don't exist anymore? I don't want it to matter, right? What happens if those shut down because, whatever, COVID 46 and everybody's going to freak out and everybody like, cool, sounds good. So let's shut it down and we're going to, whatever, man. I don't want to be tied to it. I don't want to have to worry about that. I don't want to have to worry about providing for my wife and my children if something like that happens. I don't want to be tied to anything that I don't want to be tied to. And all I want to be tied to is them. So that's what a good life is now. How self-sufficient can we be? How sovereign can we be? How free can we be?
That's cool. That's epic. And I think that something that you mentioned earlier that I'd love to bring back was how many cage fights did you have? How many
Nine.
cage? Nine? Dude, I'm so jealous. I've had one too many severe concussions to go into striking. I do a lot of jiu-jitsu and
Good for you.
like hitting the
Very
pads and
cool.
stuff like that. But
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about that? Like what inspired you to do that in the first place, and then how were those experiences?
Yeah, that was the freaking great
Because
experiences.
that's living.
I grew up,
That's living.
dude, 100%, 100%. So I grew up kickboxing. So that was something I got into at a young age. So that was something I had always enjoyed, and that was just simply a product of I grew up in the '80s, and it was like Bruce Lee movies and that Jean-Claude Van Damme and all those. Like, oh man, I want to do that, right? So and I was very fortunate. The world champ. Actually, there's a movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme where there's a guy who plays his brother, who was my coach because he was the world heavyweight kickboxing champion. Yeah, and he was from my hometown in California. So I started training with him as a young kid. So, kickboxing was something I had always done, and I always enjoyed that. And I always leaned, I tended to lean aggressive, and I enjoyed physical combat, and I enjoyed fighting. And sometimes that was not a good thing when it wasn't done in the ring, but it's a product of being a knucklehead kid. And so I'd enjoyed that. But I was in college. Hadn't been doing anything really competitively kickboxing wise, not a whole lot, while I was in college and working to put myself through school. But I walked by these mats, and I knew what the UFC was at that point because it was, that had become a thing. And so I'd watched, and I'm like, man, this is kind of crazy. And walked by a mat room, like an old wrestling mat room at the campus one day, and I looked in and I see these guys, and they're grappling and they're doing jujitsu, which wasn't there wasn't a jujitsu school on every corner like there is now, right? It wasn't even really still very few people even knew what the UFC was at that point. And
It's crazy that you just
um,
walked past like that happening. That's
I
wild.
walked past it. I was a kinesiology major, so I was in like these sports halls, a lot on campus, right? And so I walked past, and these dudes are just grappling and they're getting at it, and I'm like, whoa! I'm like, that's pretty rad. Also, dude, I can fight, right? Like I'm gonna go in there and like see if these guys will let me. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
see you
show them what's
later.
going on, right? Yeah. And so I go in there and just got my ass beat, man. And it was just like these guys just turned me into a freaking pretzel, and I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, I need more of this. Like, what? Like, this is fantastic. So it turns out these guys were one of them was part of the original Lions Den group, like Ken Shamrock's
Crazy.
Lions Den team, right?
Whoa.
So he was one of those guys, and he lived out there now. And then another guy um, actually went on. He had done some amateur fights, and he went on to fight for AKA out of San Jose for Javier Mendez's crew back in the day. So they were studs, man. And so um, I got connected through that, and so I graduated college, and once I turned down that job at the White House and started working those odd jobs, I was in the Bay Area and saw that Frank Shamrock had a school out there, and was just like, all right, man, I got to get out there and go train with him. Like, this is rad. He's a
Whoa.
UFC champ. Like, I need to get out there and go do it. So I went out there and started training with Frank,
Dude,
and
those guys were massive.
they were freaking
I can't
savage.
imagine what it would have been like in person. You're just like,
Oh,
what's
they're
going on?
savages, man. Savages. Great guys, but savages.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was training with Frank, and just was having a great time. Was learning the jiu-jitsu game, reinvigorated on the striking side, and was just learning how to put it all together. And there was a tryout for Ken was wanting to relaunch the new Lions Den, and so he was having a tryout at his house in California, and he kind of put it out there, and I was like, I'm gonna go maybe try out for this. So I
I
applied, and
love that it's at his house.
it was partially at his house and then the gym out there as well. But yeah, it was partially at his property. That was the first part of it. And so I applied to go out there, and I got the okay to go out. So I'm like, oh, hey, cool, man. I'm gonna go out there and try out for this. But then I get this phone call while I'm at work, and I answer the phone, and he says, "Yeah, this is Ken Shamrock," and I'm like, "This is who?" He's like, "This is Ken Shamrock." I'm like, "Holy shit!" I'm like, because I'd watched this guy in the UFC, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" And I'm training with your brother, and he's like, "Yeah, it's awesome, man." He's like, "You're gonna come out for the tryout," and I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Okay, you understand? There's gonna be you're gonna be fighting that day. Like, you're actually gonna be fighting that day." And I'm like, "Okay." Okay, yeah, I
Yes,
didn't
sir.
know if I understood that or not, but sounds
Absolutely.
good. Like sounds great. And he's like, but actually, would you be able to? How much do you weigh right now? And I'm like, oh, I weigh like 100. I'm like 180 right now. He's like, cool. Can you make 170 by Friday? And I was like, I guess. Why? He's like, I'd actually like you to. I'm gonna do a promotion the night before, so I'd actually like you to fight on that card the night before, so we can see what's going on, and then we'll come do the tryout the next day. I'm like, oh, you want me to go fight the night before I go fight a bunch of times? Like, sounds good. Sign me up. Um,
What day
so,
was
uh,
this? What day was
so
that?
this was like on a Monday. So I was like,
Monday,
all right,
right, 10 pounds, 4 days. Gotcha.
I gotta just go cut it and get off work on Friday to be up there for the weigh-in to go fight on Saturday to go to his house on Sunday for the tryout.
Crazy.
Yeah. So I got out there and so I had my first fight under his promotion that weekend.
How did that
So
feel? Like
horrible.
going
Like
in there.
it felt like it felt it was, I mean it felt great. It was fun. It was cool. It was cool getting the phone call from, a guy that I looked up to. It was cool. Like that all was cool. But the weight cut was horrible. I didn't know what I was doing. Like the
Yeah, I'm just like,
nerves.
what did you do? Like, what did you do? Given that
I
I
just stopped
bet you
eating. I
hadn't
just
done it
stopped eating.
before.
I just stopped eating. I was like, I'm just not going to eat. Like, that's great. And then turns out, this promotion was being held in a part of California that's at the altitude is like 6,000 feet.
Crazy.
So a bad weight cut going up 6,000 feet. Just getting there, like I cut too much weight. I actually got down to 163. Um,
Seriously?
yeah, and I
I
was like,
bet
oh,
you
I guess
felt
that's cool.
terrible.
I felt horrible. So then I go step, and I didn't know who, this was back in the day. Like there was no, I found out who I was fighting at the weigh-in, and he's this guy,
Oh
he's a
my God.
freaking a Mongol, so he's in a biker gang. And so it's him and a bunch of his biker gang buddies. And I'm like, well, this sucks. I'm like this preppy kid that works at Abercrombie and Fitch. Like, all right, cool. Sounds good. So we get on the scale and I'm like,
Just
I feel like,
malnourished.
yeah, dude, I'm just malnourished. He's all tatted up. I'm like, well, this is gonna suck, and like,
Oh my God,
but
dude.
but it would be the promotion. It's Ken Shamrock throwing it. Bruce Buffer is our announcer.
Crazy.
Like
That's so funny.
Randy Couture is ringside. Boss Rutan is ringside. Guy Metzger's ringside. Like
Dude.
I'm like, dude, this is great. Like I'm just gonna get at it. Like let's rock and roll. Let's see what
Yes.
happens. So yeah.
Yes.
So
That's the best. You're
yeah.
like,
It was a
best
hell of
day
a
ever.
day.
Let's get after it.
Let's do it. But that's one of those things, man, where you look back and you're like,
Oh
dude,
my God.
I'm so glad that I did it, and you learn a lot about yourself
I bet,
in
man.
all of those kind of things. And you come out and just the noise on anything else that seems to be stressful just gets turned down a little bit.
Mm.
The more you step into those things, the more you go, all right, man, everything's going to be all right. Let's see what happens. Let's give it a freaking roll.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. I mean, you obviously enjoyed it. You went and did 8 more, right? It's like,
Yeah, man. Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Far
It was
out.
cool.
Far out. I can only imagine, dude, that the intensity must have just been so wild. You
Oh,
know,
it was
like,
intense, man. And I was, the weight cut plus just the nerves plus the altitude. Like I was toast before I even went out there, just warming up in the back. I'm like, I'm done. I'm spent.
fuck. How did you
Uh,
go in that first one?
so I mean, I look back at it, and I'm like, I look, because I mean, I have the DVD of it too, and so I'm like, oh my
Get
God,
out of town. Really?
oh yeah, no, I have the DVD of it, so it's like
Sick.
I just showed my kids not too long ago. It was fun. But yeah, man, like you can tell, I'm toast. I go out there, it's like just piss poor striking. He takes me down pretty easily. Um, I end up getting decent position, and I tried to start throwing some blows from the top, and I just remember being on top of him, just being like trying to drop elbows and stuff, and I'm just like, I could die right now. I'm so tired.
So
Like
tired, I bet,
I'm
dude. You must have been
just
so
so
exhausted.
toast, and so, but the round ended on his feet, and so we go into the second round. And my corner man was so wrapped up into what was going on, he didn't pull out my chair, so like I just sat down in the corner of the ring. I was just done, dude. I didn't want to go back out there just because I was so tired, but went back out. And again, got taken down immediately, and the dude started dropping bombs on me, but. Um, I had very limited jujitsu, but I was able to slap a triangle while he was pounding me. So I actually submitted him in the second round.
Oh my
So I
God, dude.
got
Seriously?
so yeah, and so then at that point, once I did that and I locked it in, and I'm like, I think I have this tight,
Oh my goodness.
and I pulled his head and pulled his arm, and I'm like, no, this is tight. And then I felt him tap, and at that point, I wasn't tired anymore. It was just like whoosh, jump up, and I'm like, can't wait to do this again.
He passes
And
out.
Ken's like, congratulations, you're doing this tomorrow, and I'm like. That seems a little too soon, but that's fine. It's all good. Let's do it anyways. So, yeah, it was cool, man.
Wow, man. Wow, I can't. I just like I've had that feeling of exhaustion when you're just bonking and you're
Oh,
just dying. Like I can't imagine having to do that while fighting somebody. I'm like that would just be so nuts.
worse, but yeah,
So
but it was
nuts,
cool,
dude.
man.
That's
It was
epic.
cool. And I actually, to
That's
tell you the truth, I still talk to the that guy that I fought that day too. I don't talk to him a lot, but we follow each other on on social media and
sick.
stay
That's
in touch a
amazing.
little bit. He's still in a biker gang, and he's a very dangerous human being. But there's just mutual respect there when you have that
Totally.
combat. You know what
I
I mean?
bet.
So
Absolutely, man.